Okay. Good morning. I'm Paul Tokunaga. I'm the founder and president of MELD, Multi-Ethnic Leadership Development. And welcome to a conversation with my friend, Dr. Marnie Ginsberg. Marnie is the founder of a remarkable organization, Reading Simplified. When I started MELD in 2017, Marnie was one of the very first people I went to get her help in navigating a startup. She helped me learn the ropes of starting a startup, and I've been a fan of Reading Simplified ever since. Mainly as a subscriber to their Facebook community. So Marnie, tell us about Reading Simplified, and when did you create it, and what pushed you to create a new organization? What's your mission?
Mm-hmm. Well, over 20 years ago, I was a public school teacher, and I realized that my middle school kids were reading 2 years below grade level. And then I also realized I didn't know how to fix it. And I looked high and low for answers, and they were hard to come by. And then I realized that my lack of preparedness for the teaching of these kids in reading was actually kind of common. And I realized that we've been fighting so-called reading wars for generations about how we should teach kids to read. And as a result, teachers are getting a lot of misinformation. So one thing led to another, but I had this bug ever since then. When I was faced with my own problem, I found solutions. I had great success with private tutoring clients, and then I taught some other teachers. I developed a similar approach at the University of North Carolina. It was they received federal funds for ongoing intervention research, but all of these things that I did are in the same path of trying to solve the problem. And I've discovered that the university research, even though we had good outcomes, it didn't actually affect change in schools. So I started Reading Simplified. Really, the idea of it came to me in 2013, worked on developing the materials for students and the training videos for teachers, and didn't actually have a product, the Reading Simplified Academy, until 2016. And our mission at Reading Simplified generally is to help overwhelmed, confused teachers streamline reading instruction for any beginning or struggling reader, and at the same time accelerate those kids. So I'm aiming to solve the same problem that I had, not only for the teacher, but also at the secondary step for the children. We have so many children that are not reading well, mostly because of these reading wars and how the grownups have made it political and not followed what we've known from science. And as a result, we have over 65% of American fourth graders not reading proficiently. And this is not just a natural, inevitable occurrence. Researchers have found out that with interventions that's in line with research, that even struggling readers, they can move them up to average levels. So as few as 98 to 95% of the population should really, really struggle with reading, but that's completely at odds with the reality of our current data. So we're working hard at Reading Simplified to be a part of that change.
You used the term reading wars a couple times. Can you unpack that a little bit? What does that mean?
Well, inside reading education, people have been arguing about how we should go about teaching kids to read the words primarily. And even dating into the 19th century, there's been one ideology is that you should teach the whole word from the beginning. And the other ideology is that you should teach the parts, the small parts, which would be the phonics information, that SH is sh. And these two have been clashing for generations. And yet since the 60s, we've had growing evidence that the brain learns to read by having explicit explanation of how our written code works by looking at those small parts first. Anyway, we learn the small parts, learn how to put them together, and then we recognize whole words. The path has to go through those small parts. So the science has been there, but many teacher prep universities and professional development communities and leaders and books they have been teaching more along that whole word approach, despite the evidence. And so many kids struggle from all walks of life, but we know that it hits this poor instructional pattern hits kids of minority status or in low economic communities the hardest.
Okay, that's helpful to when I heard the word wars, I thought, oh, that sounds brutal out there.
Yeah, well, the language can be deadly.
Well, as our subscribers know, MELD works with for-profit and nonprofit organizations to provide executive coaching, strategic planning, and training in racial diversity. And we almost exclusively work with adults. So our subscribers might be wondering why the interest in Reading Simplified, whose mission on the surface seems very different than MELD's mission. So why should MELDers, that's kind of our term for our tribe, why should MELDers care about Reading Simplified's mission? And can you kind of connect the dots for us, Marnie,
Right.
between what Reading Simplified does and what MELD does?
Well, our community are the simplifiers. And I think both simplifiers and melders care about justice.
Yeah.
And we know that there are many structural problems in our society, particularly you and I here in the US. We're well aware of challenges that people of all ages face. There's across the lifespan. There are so many things that we need to do to work on this, and yet we know that there's a huge lever in what happens in the first 2 years of school. This moment in time for a young person changes their trajectory and gives opportunity or denies it. And it is a very predictable pattern that if a child doesn't know how to read well by the end of first grade, 9 out of 10 times, he will never learn to read well. And then there will be a host of damaging fallout from that. Very, very, very few individuals can overcome a poor negative start in reading. And not because there's something like a developmental window closes. It's just that the system doesn't reward anyone except those that read well in school. So our mission is to rescue those kids who are suffering needlessly in the early days and point attention to this point in time where so much could be changed without changing everything in society. We're still going to have poverty. We're still going to have bias and racism. Those things, we can still work against them. And yet a relatively easy opportunity to just change our instruction, be more in line with what we know about how the brain learns to read, and have a fixation on solving this problem early, then so many more children would succeed and have better self-identity and success in school. A host of problems would be avoided. And there's such a positive snowball that happens actually when you do learn to read. So many of another way of framing it is like the story that Dan Heath retold, I think, in Upstream. We could be, as adults, trying to see these people that are maybe drowning, coming down to us in a river, and we see that, and they're just, they keep coming, and we pull them out of the river, and we're really focused on our mission. But we could also think, why are these people in the river drowning? We could go upstream, right, and capture them from before they get thrown in the water, or maybe who's throwing them into the water. We got to stop them. It's so much easier and wiser to stop the problem from happening in the first place. So
help us to understand, you use the term, I think it was negative fallout. If a child doesn't learn to read by first grade, there's negative fallout. Can you kind of walk us down a path of, do you ever watch the news, you hear something, and then you go, well, we could have caught that early on. And
Exactly.
it's like it was a domino effect
Right.
because the child didn't read, this happened and this happened and this happened into their adult life, etc.
Right. We have so much research on reading. Psychologists have studied it more than anything else with psychology. So we have great understanding about how it works. And we also have great understanding about these sociological correlates. So
Yeah.
if you don't learn to read early on average, statistics would tell us that you're going to not feel good about yourself. Your self-identity, self-efficacy will take a hit. You will maybe either disengage or act out. So there's going to be a response, a behavioral response that affects the student in the classroom, and then it affects her teacher or her classmates. So we have that identity, motivation issues, behavioral issues, certainly cognitive development and academic development. Reading unlocks every other area to learn in school. And so when children don't read well, they actually more likely don't do math well. And in every area, not just reading, but I point out math because you don't think of it as reading related, but everything depends on, can you even read the instructions? Can you read the guidance? And so there's a huge academic fallout. And then as a result, long-term, children who don't read well are more likely to drop out. They're more likely to have reduced economic opportunities, and they're even more likely to have earlier mortality.
Mhm.
So it's particularly when we think about low income communities, it's just perpetuating the cycle of poverty. Our schools where our dream is that our schools would be a place of breaking the cycle.
Sure.
But because this reading conundrum has tripped us up for so long, we are not breaking that cycle. In fact, we're just perpetuating or exacerbating it.
So talk some more about so this is kind of at the heart of MELD, is working with people of color, talking about racial diversity and issues like that. So can you talk a little bit more about how it impacts the children of color, and especially if they're coming from a low economic
Right.
background, how in particular what the effects are for them if they
Yes.
don't learn to read by first grade?
Yes, it's devastating. And this is where I really want us to try to work on breaking the cycle.
Yeah.
As I mentioned earlier, over 65% of our fourth graders are not proficient. But if you're looking at certain ethnic communities, the statistic is even far worse. For African Americans, it's about 83%. And I think girls are probably reading better, and on average, they score better in the early ages. And then, so if we think about an African American male, he may have really a challenging time in the school system because with that type of start. So that's this is a statistical thing.
Yeah.
And so that's
helpful.
gonna impact in so many different ways. And then there's just the inevitable fallout. Like the teacher may have reduced expectations because this child doesn't seem to learn to read, and she's not aware of how it may be in relation to the instruction that she's been told to give.
Yeah.
So it's all interrelated dynamics. We see even in preschool that African American boys are more harshly evaluated by preschool teachers when they're in like an experiment to see how they respond. So there's some prejudices that we're working into the system that then intersect with reading, and then that trajectory for the child is so much changed. And yet the school can make a difference. As I mentioned, researchers have shown that it's actually doable. So we can teach everyone how to read. That's what we do at Reading Simplified.
So Marnie, you're talking about the impact on an individual, so the more the micro level. I also know that you're a big picture person and you think on the macro level. Can you try to describe a society with a high percentage of first graders year after year, decade after decade, who can't read. What will that society look like? Maybe we're already there.
Yeah.
And so we just look out the window, but if it
Yeah,
gets worse and worse,
exactly.
what's the society going to look like?
It is devastating. And I do believe we are there to some extent, and it will continue. It can continue to grow. There is a movement called the Science of Reading movement to get better instructional practices into the early years.
Okay.
And that may turn things around. It's exciting to see that happen. And so like a break into the arguments of the reading wars. But um we there's, as I mentioned earlier, there's the cognitive impact, there's the motivational impact, there's the behavioral impact, just learning the information about that they're supposed to learn about in school. And so there's so much of school success that will be negatively impacted when kids don't crack the code. And so the child has a reduced expectation for herself.
Mm-hmm.
And then other communities that have built-in biases, they're just perpetuated, if not extended. Maybe, well, this child is from a low-income family. That's the best they can do. Or this child that, these kinds of the thoughts enter into our head when we don't see systematic success. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just going to perpetuate
Mm-hmm.
biases and perpetuate missed opportunities. I think that's really the thing I should have said earlier, is like, we're trying to give more children access and opportunities to thrive and be at their best. And reading unlocks that door. And we're shutting the door on so many kids so quickly in life that it's a tragedy.
Would you say that your main approach to this is the establishment of the Reading Simplified Academy? And I went on your website, and it's clear that you identify elementary school teachers as your main audience, and so you developed the Reading Simplified Academy. If I can quote your website, it's described as a complete A to Z blueprint that will give you the tools and know how to teach every reader in your class faster and with less stress. I, I love that description. Can you talk some about how the Academy uniquely equips teachers who are working with children of color, ethnic minority children? And are there different modes of learning working with them than with white kids?
Mm-hmm. Our area of expertise is really making the job of the teacher much, much easier to meet any child's needs.
Okay.
So we don't yet have extensive focus on how to have culturally responsive teaching. That, I think, that is an important element for teachers, but our expertise is more this child, whether they're Black or brown or poor or rich, has certain cognitive and academic and motivational makeup. How
Mm-hmm.
can we meet their needs?
Mm-hmm.
And then if we have a simpler system for diagnosing what everybody needs, and our system in our classroom is actually designed to break kids up into small groups and then be more likely to meet their needs, then they will be successful. It's in that interaction of smaller groups or one-on-one where the teacher can learn more about what the child's bringing to the school day and meet his needs. That's the most powerful lever that we have, particularly in our community. The work that we did, that I did at the University of North Carolina in developing the targeted reading intervention, which has a lot of the similar activities and diagnostic mindset. Researchers have found preliminary evidence that many different communities, including English language learners and African American boys, make similar gains in that environment,
Okay.
which should be kind of like, well, that should be expected, but actually a lot of intervention research doesn't get that. We often have a gap of learning rate of growth. So that, and I think that's not because we're doing a great job of changing the text and making sure that they're being more representative and expanding worldview that way, although I believe that's
Sure.
essential, but more because we're finding the doorway to just meet their needs
Sure.
and then give them access. It's just quick access so they can be successful. Now, having said that, there's a line of research that has noted that African American the children that use an African American dialect can have a more challenging time picking up written English because we access how we access learning to read is through phonology or the sounds of language. And so if one community's sounds are different from another community's, and there can be a little bit of a clash. So teachers do need to be sensitive to that and tune kids into the way that this word looks and the sounds of the way the word looks, has these sound, make, and that information can again help unlock the code for the child so that she can be successful.
So it's confusing for her when she used to hearing a certain thing, reads the words on a page, and they're out of sync with what she.
Well said. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So she has to be bilingual.
Yeah,
She's code
absolutely.
switch really.
Yeah.
And so that's an extra challenge.
Yeah.
The people that have multiple languages, ultimately they gain better in language overall, but it's more challenging. And it's amazing when children have those skills, but in the early days, it can make it more challenging, whether it's a different dialect or a different language.
Sure. So I'm going to put on my MELD hat and ask you a few questions that relate to kind of the world that we operate in. And so can you help us understand at what age approximately can children comprehend and process racial diversity issues? Do you have a sense of that?
This is not my area of expertise, but I've certainly been working with kids for a while and teachers for a while. I've been a mom, and I believe it's actually quite young, especially if they've had any negative experience. My perspective is that children can be told the truth quite early, or at least some measure of the truth, even as early as pre-K. And it's probably to their benefit if certain challenges in our society are not hidden from them.
What another question from the diversity angle. What kinds of media seem to be most effective in helping young readers comprehend and process? Does that make sense?
Yeah, there are you, especially when you're talking about racial differences.
Yeah.
Yeah. Reading research has provided us a lot. They have demonstrated that narratives of other people can help build empathy. And I think this is a great doorway for, again, why we should start early for changing the deep-seated racial challenges that particularly I know of in the US. So those stories could be written and teachers could read them aloud. The kids could read them themselves. It could also be video, anything that kind of takes the child outside of his own experience and helps him to think about the experiences of another. Walking in someone else's shoes, classic example, is I think is a great tool. It's not the only one, but it's fairly easy in the elementary classroom because a lot of teachers embrace the read aloud, and it's a really good tool. But then it needs to be not just the read alouds that maybe we grew up with. Me as like a white woman, and that's very classic. The elementary classrooms are mostly led by white women. So if their childhood books have brought them comfort and enjoy, then that's great. They can also expand into other books to make sure that they're showing a window to other people's experiences.
I could see where the reading aloud can be effective and can then trigger an appetite for actual reading themselves.
That's my hope, our hope. Yeah.
Yeah.
especially you have to fight back against the screens now more than
Oh
ever.
gosh.
You have to a love of learning, a love of reading doesn't, I don't believe, happen just through osmosis, or it just doesn't happen naturally. Um, it has to be modeled and developed, and it is in a battle against the ease of the entertainment of the screen.
Yeah. It takes discipline.
Right.
Yeah.
And for the child, though, early on, if the teachers or parents are reading aloud a lot, it's a lot less discipline because it's just fun. But they need to have a lot of those experiences to recognize, oh, that's a little richer and deeper than this 15-second or 7-second TikTok thing.
Do you think it's necessary for there also to be a pattern and habit of reading at home? It's part of the life of the family
It
that
would be
rubs off?
ideal.
Okay.
Children who have that background, they know a lot more words. And so
Okay.
they can actually learn to read those words more easily because they've heard them. And then they have that identity as a reader, and they may have some emotional positivity towards it because it was always a nurturing experience potentially with a mom or a dad. And so it definitely is a tremendous benefit. And yet I know a lot of our communities are not, and there's a movement to try to get people to at every age to be reading to their children, but
Mhm.
it is a challenge. And so the school can pick up a lot of the slack. The children are there for 6 or 7 hours a day. If we prioritize the reading, access to the code early on, but also reading aloud, we could compensate for a lot of missed
Yeah.
opportunities in other realms.
Yeah. In our work, again, primarily with adults, we encounter a lot of people who would say color blindness, being I don't see color when I see you,
Right.
is the goal.
That was the
Um,
generation I grew up in.
yeah. And um, at what age can a child move beyond color blindness to seeing the beauty of differences in other ethnicities?
hmm Again, I think it's easier the earlier we start.
Yeah.
Their young children have many fewer fears than older children and certainly adults. So fear is often one of the things that divides us. So when we start um, giving access, really, it's access to understanding different people besides the people that you just see in your small community, or even differences within your community. So stories are, even from pre-K, elementary, and then discussing it, are really powerful tools to help undermine the negative history that we have, and give the children an opportunity to see, as you said, like beauty in many cultures, not just, stereotypically, sometimes when we've in elementary, we've had multicultural efforts. And so that's like, let's study Mexico. We'll just talk about their food.
Yeah.
So sort of like cultural studies light. So if we can dive into real experience and know and understand different communities that are, and not just the food culture, but really hearing from diverse perspectives, and seeing the differences in language or music or religion or all of the parts of culture, it will enrich our children's understanding of themselves and others, and then better prepare them to be good citizens.
I'm thinking of certain parts of the country where there's not a lot of diversity,
Right.
and so everyone kind of looks like each other. And I would think in those environments, especially reading of other people's experiences is vital for them to understand that
Exactly.
what they're experiencing isn't the end all, isn't everybody's experience.
I totally agree. And it's important, again, back to the teacher. It's really important for her to be well prepared to have access to great texts that aren't just
Yeah.
ones that are in line with her cultural background.
Yeah. Yeah. As an educator, what do you wish white children would learn about each ethnic minority group? What would be important for them to know, to learn?
Well, that's a big question, but I guess
Yeah, it's
the
big.
big picture is that, to have respect and care for each person, and regardless of their culture, as precious and just as important as I am. And to also understand the historical roots
Yes,
of our current structural inequalities, to know different cultures' treasures, which would include their food, their music,
sure.
but also the tragedies that a community has faced, particularly in the U.S. To know the history of slavery, Jim Crow laws, forced migration, the concentration camps. If we don't know these parts of our history that are dark, and we only know our own experiences. Like me as a white woman, I haven't faced the same level of challenges, and the only way that I can have empathy is to either have close relationships with others from different communities, or have read about them. Those are like some of the easiest, again, levers for me to have a broader worldview.
At what age? When is it too soon, too early to introduce children to the Holocaust, to
Right. That is
Japanese American internment
yes.
camps, how we
Uh,
treated Native Americans? At what at what age can they take that in?
and this is very tricky because we have it's another area of fighting in our culture right now, when we're having
Yeah,
um
yeah,
adults fight about what is okay for kids to know. And we right now are we provide some materials for teachers to use with children for things for them to read, and we're trying to make them more diverse right now. And so I'm looking at African American poetry, and um, do I put this in the kindergarten section, or do I put this for the fourth grader? So right now, I am personally leaning towards um, earlier mentioning of
okay,
challenges,
okay,
but not really the full um, uh, darkness of it until upper
yeah,
elementary. And even then, of course, we wouldn't really go into all of the
sure,
things of the Holocaust, or all of the horrible things that have happened in slavery. But to be they're more capable in upper elementary of hearing hard things. But even, as I said, even in pre-K, in kindergarten and first grade, they can know that there's a wrong that's been done.
so you create an awareness at that
Yes,
time, and then as they get older, they're more able to process it and learn, go
exactly.
deeper with it.
That's my perspective.
Okay. Um, I've got 20 questions for you, which I won't ask, but uh, uh, a couple more. What, this is a little political, maybe. What's your assessment of how racial issues are approached in public school curriculum, and if in any ways, what would you like to see changed?
Mm-hmm.
That fair question?
Well, it is hard.
Yeah,
And again, I'm more of an observer, like many of you, but I have more connections to the schools.
right.
Um, and I think what I said before is about my perspective of, like, let's tell them hard things from an early age and not protect them from it. Let's help them have the tools of the mainstream culture, which would be mostly white male history, but also have access to the history, the truths about people's experience in other cultures. So that's my perspective. But we have even right now, a political movement to keep a lot of this information,
Yeah,
besides just maybe the white man's history, out of the school. So this is really this was very disturbing to me. But I don't think most teachers are buying into that.
okay,
Nevertheless, they haven't been well prepared. Like I said, most of them are white women, and that's just one, viewpoint. And then a lot of if they were educated in the last 20, 30 years, they definitely learned about the importance of teaching of different cultures. But it is a hot potato, so they feel they're putting their job on the line
right.
almost. If they do, they read the Watsons Go to Birmingham in third grade or fifth grade, or just an example of a book of about an African American family.
Yeah.
Um, it is very challenging. So I don't have a complete solution by any means, but my answer is always reading. I'm kind of on a broken record here. So if we had teacher groups, were reading both novels from people of color and maybe historical texts of people of color, they would probably get the education that many of us missed. Our in the US particularly, we have had a social studies mindset, which has, in terms of how we teach, um, one of the domains in which we teach kids, and we haven't had a systematic history mindset. And so not only have a lot of us
Mhm.
missed out on just some fundamentals about the
Yeah.
history that are from the lens of the mainstream, but also, of course, we haven't heard the many experiences, both good and bad, for those of people of color. And so if I'm a teacher and I don't have that background knowledge, how can I pass it on to my children, my students? So the first step would be just to have better knowledge, and it opens your eyes, as we've been discussing.
Well, and I love the idea of materials being written for and available for children, younger children, when it's appropriate, and how it's presented. In my own situation, I'm Japanese American, and I had like 43 relatives in the internment camps of World War II. It was it was not talked about in the home of
Mm,
what they went through. It was
mm,
taboo to talk about it. The attitude was, we just grin and bear it, we move on, and let the past stay in the past. It wasn't until I was in my second year of college that a book came out that talked about that whole experience.
mm,
So I went without, my whole childhood and high school years, scratching my head. Something went on back there.
right.
When they said the word camp, it doesn't mean the same thing as when white kids talk about camp,
Oh,
you know. And so when I read this book, um, my eyes just it opened my eyes, and
mm,
the whole it's like, finally I know what my parents
right.
went through. Had I had that earlier, it would have helped me so much. So
Exactly. That is so powerful. And then me as a white woman, I think I can remember like a paragraph and a picture in one textbook. And and it didn't mean a lot to me. And maybe I think we had discussions like, because World War II does get a lot of
yeah,
time in the school system in America. But so it was like, should they have bombed, and should we have put the Japanese American there? So there was a little discussion, but it wasn't the same as actually really hearing the inside of the people's lived experience and the horror of it. You just can't imagine having yourself uprooted by your as a citizen. And so I totally agree that this my experience as a student has been that it's been more of as an adult that I become aware of these things, and we could give this information to children earlier. And it doesn't always have, well, again, this is challenging because everything, our culture right now reacts politically to everything. And so it is very tricky. But there are a lot of excellent children's books that have been written in the last 5 to 10 years,
yeah.
or longer, that gently tell the story of different communities, including some negative histories, but it's just gentle for the little people. And I think that it would be ideal for changing our culture if our children are more and more aware of it. And I mean, the children are more and more aware of it, than, like, my children are much more attuned to these things than the way I was raised. But I think we still have a long way to go.
Example of that is, um, when I was a kid growing up, the only thing that really mattered to me was baseball. And a couple of years ago, I was given a children's book, lots of good pictures in there. The title was called Baseball Saved Us. And it was about the role of baseball in the internment camps through the eyes of a young
Oh, how
boy.
beautiful.
And I thought, gosh, if I had had that book when I was
Yeah.
in second, third grade,
Right.
it would have just put so many words to feelings I had but didn't know what was going on.
Right.
And Better late than never, but sure wish I had them back then.
Yeah.
Marnie, this has been great. Thanks so much for sharing. And I wonder, do you have like a closing story of how your work with Reading Simplified has had an impact, maybe on a teacher or an individual that you could share?
We have a Slack channel among my team members called testimonials or hot topics. And we get one every day because teachers all over are so excited when they discover, like me, they were frustrated and now they have a solution. So they're actually seeing their children succeed. It's really, really exciting. So I've got a lot. One of our biggest fans is Jennifer, who said a couple years ago she had been teaching 18 years and she'd never had all of her first grade English language learners, mostly English language learner classroom in Arizona, learn to read. But after she discovered Reading Simplified, then the whole class got up to the benchmark.
Oh, wow.
And then I have Catherine in the Cook Islands. I was so excited to have somebody from the Cook Islands write to me, and she teaches middle school kids who are struggling in reading. She did just 17 weeks with Reading Simplified and got her middle school students up almost 4 grade levels in reading because she had a standardized test before and after. A lot of middle school teachers and high school teachers will validate that they don't see that often. And then it gets, a lot of times we have even teachers and parents, and then it's very personal for them. Like I can remember Maggie was a teacher in Canada, but she was also a mom, and she had taken some time off to raise her kids, and she had a child with autism. So she taught him to read over the summer with Reading Simplified. And she said to me, with a tear in her eye, and caused a tear in my eye, she said she knows her son with autism is going to have a lot of challenges when he hits the school, but at least reading won't be one of them. And she had said before that she realized she had masters, but didn't know how to teach reading. So this is why I like to do my work, even though it's challenging.
Those are the stories that probably get you up in the morning.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's wonderful. So we'll post it somewhere else, but is it on the website? Is it readingsimplified.com?
Perfect.
Okay, but we'll also put that in print too. If people
Thank you.
want to check out what you do. Thanks so much, Marnie, not just for this, but for the work that you're doing with Reading Simplified. And just, I'm inspired.
Thank you.
It's
I'm really
really
grateful
important what you're doing.
Yes, and as is you. So it's great that we get to talk and encourage one another, I hope.
Great. Thank you.